Hello. I was like doing that as an intro. It makes me feel like a old-timey police officer. But I think one of the topics of today is this lovely term called fatherless behaviour. And this has been cropping up more and more recently. And I think, to briefly summarise, fatherlessness behaviour is the accumulation of all of the issues that happen with both boys and girls, men and women who did not experience a strong father figure in their life growing up or during their teen years. Sorry, just looking for a place to go. And what we can really summarise it being caused by is the collective fall and the collective regression into the weak men create hard times scenario. Now, I've been trying to think through what the actual causes of this fatherlessness behaviour actually is, and I think I've been able to, in my head, summarise it, so I think I'll try and do an explanation now. So we first start off between the years 1918 and 1945, the years between World War I and World War II. The feminist movement gathering incredible steam and reaching the point in which women are then joining the workforce en masse. Now, this in of itself is not an issue. The issue is with the factory owners and the people who pay realizing, oh, we've now got, massive amounts more workforce, massive amounts more people joining the workforce. Should we increase our wages to accommodate for the increase of productivity? Should we pass that on to our workers? No, we shouldn't pass that on to our workers. We should actually reduce it, because now we've got an abundance of labour. We have an abundance of labour now, and that means that we don't have... Oh, little Pepe in the back. Should we go say hi to the Pepe real quick? We have an abundance of labour now, and so labour is actually worth less. Lovely little Pepe. And this is the start of the issues that then happen, because then in order for you to have households being able to afford a place to live, being able to afford food, being able to afford clothes on the backs of yourselves and your children, you weren't able to anymore. And this led to the decline of the many person households, i.e., 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 children. I mean, almost all of my grandparents were one of at least 8. That is simply not possible nowadays without heavy exploitation of either things like the benefit system or from just having an insane paying job, which again is the 1% of people already in the 1% worldwide when you compare the West to the rest of the world. So we've seen women joining the workforce en masse, and the owners are the ones who then decided we're not going to compensate for people to still be able to, for example, before that point, you would be able to be a lone man going out to work, and you would be able to bring just enough back if you worked hard enough for your family. Obviously, with the feminist movement and with women joining the workforce, they then experienced financial freedom, which made them not then be tied to a man to be able to provide for the household, which again led further down this rabbit hole. As we then, again, after World War II, and even before this point, we were already seeing educational reforms to keep children in schools for longer and enforce the importance of schools. Because obviously before this point, before the start of globalization at the start of the 1900s, or even, as I said, we were seeing globalization in the mid to late 1800s anyway, but the real push for it at the start of the 1900s, we were seeing more and more people move away from roles in which you would be able to pass your expertise on to your children into roles that anybody and everybody could do with little to no skill, i.e. factory work, just pure manual labour. Or, as we then progressed past World War II, administrative jobs, which again require little to no skill in terms of comparing it to something like a stonemason, in terms of comparing it to a butcher, or something that is was more of a practical occupation at that point that you could pass on to your children. So we then started to see more of that cropping up, where women were joining the workforce, they were becoming more financially independent. We were then seeing more of a push in terms of the educational system, and people staying in education for longer, and people being forced into education who might have not gone and potentially then either participated in the trade that their father was doing at that point, or they would have gone into just simple manual labour. This push into the education system, combined with the fact that then men and women were then slowly having to start both working in order to be able to combat things like inflation, things like increased pricing and costing and such, and the dilution of the labour force salaries from the owners of these companies and factories and organisations. We then experience we have to be out working. We are not then able to be at home with the children. The wives are not able to be at home with the children. And what does this cause? This causes children having to be part of a system that is designed, and again, this was something that was mentioned by Jordan Peterson, how the American and, well, basically the Western, but the American and specifically the British educational systems were designed around the Prussian schools that were designed to create an obedient military force from the schools. And again, that then in the West was then we will adopt this practice so that we can then get obedient workers from the schooling system, which is why it's very much arbitrary tests. You have all of your desks in rows. It is the factory bell that would be installed in the schools so that you are keeping on time to that bell. And this then created a dependence on the government and on these schooling systems in order for them to be raising the children. Well, why is this a bad thing? Well, it meant that parents, and specifically fathers, were becoming less and less involved with their children and less involved with the raising of their children. And you would have others raising your children more and more. And again, this is, we are seeing the pinnacle of it right now, where I think the latest statistics were that parents on average spend about 30 minutes a day with actual focused one-on-one interaction. It's scary. And so we saw these changes to the education system, and fathers then becoming more and more inclined to not be involved with their children. And again, this is partly due to the rise in promiscuity, the decline in marriage, the decline in the importance of religion and the sanctity of marriage, so that men at any point could just dip. There's no incentive for you to be loyal to someone if they've had a dodgy past. There's no incentive for you to be loyal to somebody if they're not willing to show that loyalty to you. And so we went from a point in which it was couples getting married for the sanctity of marriage, so that they would be able to safely and sustainably and securely raise a child. And so it started to move away from it being for the child. And so all of these things are compounding on one another. One thing is making another thing even worse, that's making another thing even worse, and so on. And so, what is the role of a father? I believe, in its most simplest terms, the role of the father is to be a pillar, an unmoving pillar of strength, security, and care for your child, so that when they rebel, because they always will rebel, you are able to bring them back to a moral, happy, safe, and secure moral standard. Well, why does that being missing cause fatherless behaviour? What we're seeing instead is fathers not being that for their children anymore. This is due to the infantization of men. This is due to the push of toxic masculinity and more men being scared to be domineering, to be leaders, to be those who are able to set a standard that others want to attain. And all of these cascade with the introduction of more push towards more schooling, more obedience, more control within the schooling environment, unquestioning obedience within the school system, is that when they rebel, which they always will, they're more likely to do it at school, where they are not going to be punished in the same ways that it might be within a household. Because at the end of the day, the teacher doesn't really give a shit about your kids. The teacher, when you as a child become an inconvenience, can kick you out of the class. When you become an inconvenience, they can just give you a detention and move on with their day. They're not having to teach societal moralistic standards, and they are not able to enforce upon that many children a moral standpoint, which again is why it was so important for it to be that secure environment between the parents, and especially with the father being that lead figure within a household, to set that strict moral standard. So we see then a push, again, now that we have more children being born out of wedlock, more children not being, well, almost no children being homeschooled. Who is the father figure that they can push against? Who is the father figure that they can test the boundaries of? It's the society, it's the government. It's these top of the hierarchy establishments and organizations and structures that they are having, both men and women, both boys and girls, are having to fight against, because they're not having strong father figures to bring them back onto that moral standpoint within a household, because they're spending more and more time outside of the household. You know, you wake up in the morning, your parents are already gone to work, you're then getting on a bus, you're around kids, then you're around teachers and more kids, then you get back home and you're probably then going out and spending time with children. Like, it's Lord of the Flies on a societal level, where the parents aren't actually raising their children anymore, and those in schools either have agendas or they simply do not give a fuck. And this is the sole cause of fatherlessness behaviour, that the societal laws as a whole, rather than the household rules, it's society's rules that people are now fighting against and rebelling against to push boundaries during their youth. And especially, like, the amount of people that I knew who finished university who were still children, 24 years old, 25 years old, people who did PhDs, 28, 29-year-olds, still acting like children. And it's terrifying what is happening. But again, this is why. Because we put special privileges onto the youth because we don't want them to fuck up But those privileges only existed because there was an expectation of there being a moral standpoint being enforced on them from the home environment. And that's no longer being done. Neither is it within the school environment. In fact, it's the opposite. It's the school environment telling them that they should always be the exception, that they should never listen to the rules, and that they are always right and everybody else is always wrong. This is what the school system is teaching them now. And so I think the only way in which we can actually start to approach normality again, the only way in which we can actually begin to return to normal, is to take our children out of schools. They do not teach children, they indoctrinate them. No part of modern living requires the knowledge that they enforce into children to learn. There is very little to no teachings of the law, of real history, of culture, of morals. There's almost none of that. Well, no, I would argue that there is none of that. It's, the only thing that they would teach of that is history, which they're now butchering, let's say. And so, ambulance. And so the only thing that we can really do is pull our children out of schools, homeschool them, create a proper plan that will prepare them for the real world, teach them actual important things, genuinely important things, rather than the mitochondria is a powerhouse of the cell, or a squared plus b squared equals c squared. It's things that they will learn as an adult if they need to learn it as an adult. At the end of the day, if a child is able to grasp these topics, then an adult is able to grasp these topics. So why do we force children to learn useless things on a daily basis for 8 hours every single day? It's because it's not about education, it's not about learning, it's about them learning obedience. It's about forcing them into becoming obedient worker ants. So, sorry, little side note on the failings of the school system. But again, one of the things that we can do is actually put effort into our children again. Spend time with them, teach them morals. Don't just let them get what they want. Actually enforce good behaviour and moralistic standards. Again, I keep repeating that because it's so important. And again, this doesn't apply to a lot of people. Many people of my generation do not want kids. They're not interested in kids. Good for you. But we have a responsibility for the people who do have children to raise them properly and to raise them so that they are not just good little worker ants, but that they are good members of society. Adios.